You may think it only matters every 4 years, heading to the ballot box, deciding who will run our country, who will sit over here. But every year, there are elections that will help shape the direction our nation will go in. This year alone, there are more than 100,000 offices up for an election, and those positions will help shape everything from fossil fuel regulations to whether or not you even get a vote. And that election is around the corner. Historically, off-year elections like this one have super low voter turnout, less than 15%. In Dallas, only around 6% showed up to vote for mayor in 2015, and for those 18 to 34-year-olds, less than 2% bothered to cast their ballot. Election expert Alex Nomcheski wants democracy to be more accessible.
It's not a real democracy if the average age is 60 of voters.
Not just older, but whiter, wealthier, and more conservative, which may explain why 62% of all elected offices in the U.S. are held by white men, despite them being just 30% of the U.S. population. We get it. Ballots are long, confusing, and maybe seem a bit boring.
We make it easy for voters to understand what's going to be on their ballot in every election.
34 states have regularly scheduled elections on November 2nd, according to Ballot Ready, but only a handful of those races actually impact Capitol Hill, and those races not expected to be very competitive or change the dynamic in Washington.
In every issue that's top of mind for people now that is really important, whether it's masks, vaccines, critical race theory, healthcare, the environment, local elected officials have decisions that have power over decisions that affect our lives every day.
State legislatures, for example, decide what district you vote in. Remember gerrymandering?
It is to gain partisan advantage on the map.
Those may impact future presidential races. More than 200 of those state legislature seats filled this election cycle. And that's also where some laws have been made this year that impact your ability to vote. At least 19 states have enacted 33 laws that make it harder for Americans to vote. You may have even already experienced it this year, with new restrictions on mail and early voting or harsher voter ID requirements. Most brought by those who believe the 2020 election, with the highest voter turnout ever, was stolen from President Trump. Some of those decisions can also happen at an even more local level by city councils. About 40% of all elections for 2021 are for mayors and city councils. And remember these fights? You know you've seen them.
You're all criminals and should all be in jail for child abuse.
Shame on you! Shame on you!
If you're having a discussion on whatever the case may be, on slavery, then you can talk about everything dealing with slavery, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Of all the offices up for election this year, nearly 20% of them for school board seats.
You know who wants the kids masked? He's got horns.
This decision is not about parents' rights. This is about students' rights to safe learning environments.
What happens in schools also an issue that is driving perhaps one of the most watched races in the country.
I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
The Virginia governor's race, which pits, not surprisingly, two white guys against each other. Former Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe against businessman Glenn Youngkin. And it's coming down to the same issues that those local elections impact. The difference with this one, though, it's not really an election about those two guys. Instead, it's more considered a referendum on these two.
People want to see what happens in Virginia because they think that will give a good prediction of what will happen next year and who will control Congress and the Senate and even the presidency in 2024. Is that realistic? There's some amount that's realistic in that.
We've all seen how those predictions go these past few years. But Virginia is the first major election without President Trump in office or on the ballot.
When President Trump endorsed me, I thanked him for it. I was grateful for it.
And Republican moderate Youngkin has been trying to dance a tightrope, appealing to the Republican base or Trump voters while not pushing away those conservative independents. Point in case, having the former president and a January 6th insurrection flag.
She's carrying an American flag that was carried at the peaceful rally with Donald J. Trump on January 6th.
At a rally for Youngkin that he didn't even attend himself. It's a state that President Biden won in 2020 by 10 points, the biggest victory for the historically red state since 1944.
every issue that we think of when we think of what the president does and is responsible for, why we get excited about voting for a president. All those issues have decision makers at the local level. If you care about criminal justice, district attorneys are going to be on the ballot in New York and Virginia. If you care about democracy itself, in Pennsylvania, inspectors of elections are up for election. If you care about the environment, utilities boards are up for election, and they determine rules on fossil fuels and natural gases.
Then, of course, these off-year races still have ballot measures which give citizens a voice on things that happen in their communities. In Minneapolis, voters will decide on whether or not to replace the Minneapolis Police Department. And in Denver, one that would force the city to clean up illegal camps for people experiencing homelessness and allow residents to sue if not cleared. While in Texas, a proposition will decide if state and local governments during something like a pandemic can limit religious services. So if you're in one of the 2/3 of states voting this cycle, remember,
it's not one race, it's many races. I think those are races that people didn't really realize they could vote in. Those are going to make a huge difference in our communities this fall.